Hi there. In this video, we're going to talk about operations with fractions. And by operations, I mean that we're going to be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions. All right, in order to learn about operations with fractions, we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing them first before we add and subtract. Now, multiplying fractions simply means that we're going to multiply across. Okay, and then the second thing we want to do is simplify. All right, and in this video, I'm going to show you ways where you can simplify first and then multiply across. All right, so we're going to do both ways, but that's the idea. All right, and so when we have fractions, I'm just going to jump into an example. All right, and I'm just going to make something up. Let's do 1/3 times 9/11. Okay, now in this problem, we're just going to multiply across, all right? And by that, I mean I'm going to do 1 times 9, which gives us 9. I'm going to do 3 times 11, which gives us 33, okay? Now, what I've done is I've done this part. I've just multiplied across. The next thing I want to do is simplify, all right? Because when I look at the numbers 9 and 33, I know that each of these numbers are divisible by 3. So if I divide the numerator and denominator by 3, all right, then I'm going to get 9 divided by 3 is 3, 33 divided by 3 is 11, and that's my answer. Okay, now the other way that I want to do this is using this thing called cross division. All right, so 1/3 times 9/11. I want to look at these numbers here, all right, 9/3. And what I can do is I can simplify this and say, well, 9 divided by 3 is simply just 3/1. All right, if I simplify that fraction, okay? And now what I want to do is rewrite what I have. I have 1/1 times 3/11, and I can simply just multiply across. 1 times 3 gives me 3. 1 times 11 is 11, and we get the same thing. All right, that's the idea, is that both of these things are the same. These answers are the same. Doesn't matter how you get there, but that's the idea. All right, if this makes sense to you, do it this way. However, if this makes sense to you, then do it this way. Doesn't matter, as long as you get the right answer. On this next example, we're going to do -3/4 times 5/6. Now, because I have a negative times a positive, our answer is going to remain as a negative. Okay, and if you want to simply just multiply across, you can do that. -3 times +5 is -15. Okay, if you take 4 times 6, that's going to give you 24. Now, each of these numbers are divisible by 3. All right, so if I divide each of these numbers by 3, -15 times -3, or divided by 3, is going to give us -5. 24 divided by 3 is going to give us 8, and that is our answer. Now, we can look at this another way. All right, if I take -3/4 and multiply it by 5/6, we can look and see if we can do any cross division. Now, 5 and 4, I can't divide and simplify the fraction 5/4. But I can simplify 3/6. And if I look at that, I can say 3/6 can be simplified down to 1/2. The next step down, I would write this as -1/4 times 5/2. And I'm simply going to then just multiply across. -1 times 5 gives me -5. 4 times 2 gives me 8. And that's my answer. The next thing I want to talk about is dividing fractions. All right, so when we divide fractions, keep the first fraction the same, change the division sign to multiplication, flip second fraction, and then you multiply. Okay, so what I want to do is, let's write out an example here, and let's say that we've got, say, 3/5 divided by 6/7, okay? And so with this, all right, keep the first fraction the same, so copy that down. Change your division symbol to multiplication, and I'm going to use the dot here. And then flip your second fraction, so I'm going to get 7/6, and then we just multiply across, all right? So 3/7, 3 times 7 is 21, and 5 times 6 is 30. All right, and you can simplify this by dividing this by each of these by 3. And so 21 divided by 3 gives us 7, and then 30 divided by 3 gives us 10. and that's our answer, okay? Now, you might also see this, all right? So if you've got, say, 3/5 divided by 6/7, all right? You have one fraction being divided by another, all right? And this other symbol here is a division sign, all right? So what you would want to do is simply then just go, your next step down would be to say 3/5 divided by 6/7, all right? And from there, you would do the exact same thing, all right? So it kind of just depends on how this looks. Now, again, all of this, whenever you are dividing fractions, it really turns into multiplication. So all those rules that we just learned about multiplication apply in all problems, okay? You could also, let's just finish this out and do it the other way. So times 7/6, you could still do that cross division. 3 divided by 6 simplifies to 1/2, all right? And from there, you could do 1/5 times 7/2, multiply that across, and so 1 times 7 is 7, 5 times 2 is 10, and you get the same thing, all right? So it doesn't matter which way you do it, as long as you are arriving at the right answer. Okay, the last thing I want to do is talk about adding and subtracting fractions, okay? In order to add and subtract fractions, you have to have the following. You have to have a common denominator, all right? Once you have a common denominator, you add and subtract your numerators, and you keep the denominator, and then you simplify, all right? So let's take a look, all right? The first example that I want to do is let's say I have 1/5 plus 2/5, okay? Now, notice, my numerator is the number up top, the denominator is the one that's down below, okay? And the way I remember that denominator begins with a D, that's the number that's down, okay? So because we have a common denominator, these numbers are the same. That's what I'm looking for. That means a common denominator. I then write it as 1 plus 2 all over my common denominator of 5. I then add my numerators. So 1 plus 2 gives me 3, and then we keep our denominator. Now, I don't need to simplify this because I can't divide anything into 3 and 5 except for 1. All right, but let's look at another example. So let's say I had the example -3/7 plus -4/7, okay? Notice how I have a common denominator. My denominator is the same, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite my numerator and write -3 plus -4, and this is all over my common denominator of 7, okay? So then I just operate within my numerator, all right? -3 plus -4 gives us -7, and we're going to divide that and put that over +7. Now, when I think about it, a fraction really just means division, all right? And I can divide these numbers. -7 divided by 7 is just going to give me a -1, all right? A negative divided by a positive gives me a negative, and that's my answer, okay? So all the rules that you've learned up until this point really apply, and we got to use them to be able to answer these questions. Okay, so I want to look at an example where we don't have common denominators. And what do we do in order to get a common denominator? We want to look for what's called the LCM, all right? And that's called our least common multiple, all right? So if I look at the multiples of 3, that's going to be 3, 6, 9, and 12. The multiples of 6 are going to be 6, 12, 18, and so on and so forth. Now, what I notice here is that I want to look for the least common number in these lists. So I notice that I have a 6 in both of these lists, and that's my least common multiple. So now I have to ask myself the question, all right, what do I have to multiply by 3 in order to get 6? And because it's my second number here, my second multiple, I'm going to multiply the top and bottom of this fraction by 2. All right, and I'm just going to multiply across. That's why we have to learn how to multiply before we can add. All right, and so we've got 2 times 1 gives us 2. 2 times 3 gives us 6, plus 1/6. And what we've done is we haven't changed this value. The value of 1/3 is 0.3 repeating. If you do 2 6 and you put that in the calculator, it's also 0.3 repeating. So these two numbers are the same. All right, and then we simply just do what we did before. All right, because we have a common denominator of 6, these numbers are the same, I'm going to write this as 2 plus 1 all over 6. All right, now 2 plus 1 gives us 3, and we're putting that over 6, and that's my answer. However, we're not done because each of these numbers can be divisible by 3, and then we're going to end up getting 3 divided by 3, which is 1, 6 divided by 3, which is 2, and our answer for this is 1/2. The next one I want to do is where we have two different denominators here. All right, and so again, we want to find the common denominator between them. All right, let's look at the least common multiple, all right, of our denominators. So we list those out for 3 and 4. So the multiples of 3 are going to be 3, 6, 9, and 12. The multiples of 4 are going to be 4, 8, 12, and 16. And we got to look and say, all right, my least common number in both of those lists is 12. All right, so our least common multiple is 12. That's going to be our common denominator. What we want to do is figure out what do we have to do to get turn 3 into 12 and 4 into 12. All right, so one of the things is that, you know, in the previous example, we noticed how 6 was a multiple of 3. Okay, so that's kind of an easy one, but when these two numbers are not multiples of each other, all right, a good rule of thumb is just to multiply by the opposite denominator on top and bottom, okay? And that's how we would do that. Now over here, I'm going to get -1 times 4, which gives us -4. 3 times 4 gives us 12, plus 1 times 3 is 3. 4 times 3 gives us 12, and now we have a common denominator. Once we have a common denominator, we simply just write this as -4 plus 3 in our numerator over our common denominator of 12. -4 plus 3, that's going to give us -1 over 12, and that's our answer, and that number cannot be simplified. So those are all the different scenarios. Again, practice these, because the more you do, the more patterns you see and all that. It's really important. So please reach out if you have any questions, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.